Hi there and welcome to my Tech Level 2 rushing tutorial for Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds. When the term rushing is often used, it refers to this type of gameplay. This is centred around getting two troop centres in a power core, either in Tech Level 1, on the way to Tech Level 2, or at the start of Tech Level 2, depending mostly on how much carbon is readily available in balance with your Tech Level 2 time. And with setting up a food and carbon economy, neglecting Nova in order to focus purely on pushing out two troopers and one worker per production rotation. These troopers form the core of the rush and are the ideal raiding and skirmishing unit within Tech Level 2. The most direct parallel for any Age players would be the Archer and Feudal Age. However, there is no real hard counter like the Scouts or the Skirmishers, and often the best way to beat troopers is with your own troopers. With less tech switching available, a lot of the gameplay in a rush v rush scenario can focus purely on raiding and damaging your opponent's economy and taking superior trades either on top of elevation, for that damage buff and resistance, and taking trades with superior numbers for less casualties incurred. Now I'm going to quickly go over a basic sort of transition into rushing from a well played out Tech Level 1 opener. The opener, I've gone over this in a previous video detailing highly on Tech Level 1 and sample food types. You can follow the link here to look into this if you've not, as this is an essential bedrock to build your GBG play upon. Now often, in the run up to Tech Level 2, when the economy has been set up well and we start to accumulate 250 food surplus, the halfway point to clicking tech up to T2, this is the early fork in the road for you to make a strategical decision. The next three workers could go off to Nova if you plan to tech up to Tech Level 3 quickly, or you can just add these onto carbon and use your surplus carbon onto a troop centre to provide one building towards the building rule. You require 3 Tech Level 1 buildings to tech up, and start building towards our rush strategy. You want to think about where you're going to build the troop centre. Ideally, you've been placing your early prefabs in strategic spots, wrapping around the carbon to ensure your workers are not so accessible to enemy units, and the troop centre is fairly bulky, about 2 prefabs long, and can help build up this wall. We want to make sure there's a decent defensive spot for our power core too, as if we were overwhelmed later, we don't want our opponent to just be able to shoot at it from the outskirts of our base as such, and rather be under our command centre and later turrets fire, or trapped in some sort of killing zone we've designed with our well-placed buildings. This troop centre and then this power core are to then be followed by the second troop centre, and that's the infrastructure for our rush setup. We should be on our way to Tech Level 2, and what you can afford and what order you get the following units/techs can vary based on the level of carbon you could get in respect to how fast your tech time is. What we ideally want is 3 to 8 troopers, recruits/troopers, the trooper upgrade and the range tech. The best sort of way to balance this out and attack your opponent quickest would be to get your ideal amount of troopers first while teching up, and maybe early in T2, and then do the research for troopers and the range while they are en route towards your opponent. As an added note, on these maps that have nerfs and you're able to build a nursery, instead of a couple early trooper recruits, sort of in the run up to T2, what you can do is rally 1 to 2 mounties towards your opponent. They're quite quick to get across to your opponent, they can be a bit of an annoying harass tool, and they can do a good amount of scouting for you, and then you can follow it up with the troopers. Once you've got these early troopers out, you can start working out where you're going to go from here. Between their pressure and your scout unit, that should be keeping an eye on your opponent. You should have a good idea of what your opponent's doing. Does your opponent have troop centres and a power core to defend? If not, are they taking up to T3? Are they simply just very behind in their gameplay? Look for workers on Nova, look for excessive walling. You need to be quickly deciding what it is you're doing with the rest of your time in T2. You may need to rapidly expand your food income to catch up in T2, relying on the early units to slow down your opponent. You may pull workers to build an offensive turret, knocking them off resources and slowing them down, or if they too are rushing, you will be looking to get a superior trade and some early damage, and maintain your trooper production at home in an attempt to overwhelm your opponent. And it is in this part that we will get a bit more in depth about right now. You've built maybe 1 to 2 troopers on the way to T2, you're making a couple more, then upgrading them once you send them over to your opponent. We usually want to get 5 to 7 troops together before sending them out towards our opponent. This is a decent amount to 2 volley a worker and 1-shot enemy troopers, meaning we get a decent investment out of microing them and stutter stepping around. This is something a lot of people fall into the mistake of with their units. Ensure you're getting value out of your decision to micro the unit in the first place. If we send a lower amount, it's likely we fall apart taking trades with 1 to 2 troopers being sent our way that have been freshly produced, causing us to potentially fall behind or not be a big enough threat around the farms, falling to command centre fire when making a trade for a farming worker. Then our opponent gets the momentum swing and can attack moments later with a superior sized force. Once you've gotten your initial rush together, you can quickly analyse your economy and look at upgrading carbon, probably the most essential T2 upgrade. The troops are 35 carbon, 25 food, so a lot of carbon, and as we work towards T3, we'll need plenty of farms which are all costing carbon. Farm upgrade and animal nursery upgrade can be gotten at leisure, just want to make sure we're building troopers and workers all the time, so we are not creating opportunities for our opponent to overwhelm us with their troopers by default. Leave that all to the mistakes and mishaps that you may suffer. This period after the rush can be a bit wonky depending on how much food was on the map, because a lot of the time it was just enough to get you to T2 and get your troops and early upgrades. Then you need to do an awful lot of farming. Fortunately, you don't have big upfront carbon costs anymore after your initial troop centres and power core. It's more just 70 carb every rotation or so, and you can slowly increase your farm count as you go. Outside of the economic and the military production, we need to be addressing static defence. Utilising the placement of prefab shelters in the troop centres, we can create makeshift walls to lower the opportunities our opponent can have to do damage to us. In T2 turrets are available, they are very good against troopers and cost 125 ore. We start with 250 ore. You want to build 2 turrets within your carbon line. This will create heavy losses in the event your opponent wishes to dive troops into your carbon line and provide garrison space for workers in the event of this. These turrets are a huge deterrent for any troops outside of a massive control group. This will also let you feel safer sending out your military forces to be aggressive. Now, thus, because players' bases are now set up that the majority of the workers are gathering carbon with their safety guaranteed by the turrets, and the rest are around the command centre gathering food from farms, you'll see that the opportunities to do damage to your opponent are more centred around killing farmer workers and killing farms directly. We need to make troops for defence and to create these offensive opportunities. We need them to keep our farms alive and kill our opponents. It's a low-key race to tech level 3 between you and your opponent now, without leaving yourself completely open. As you're adding on farms throughout T2 and always making workers and troopers, the food count will pile up and you will have a surplus to play with. To go off to T3, you're going to need 2 buildings, the first of which you can get a lot earlier because it will benefit your troops, and that's the war centre. Now, there's no need to rush a war centre. I don't believe the upgrades are that pivotal in trades, and there's a lot of wiggle room. And to be honest, a lot of the time you and your opponent's troops are fighting, there's more important differentials like the number of units involved and hills, and you may be focusing on killing their workers rather than their troops. So, War Centre and its upgrades in my eyes can be grabbed just when you can afford them, and there's no need to prioritise it over the other aspects like your eco upgrades and the production of your units. If you come from Age of Empires 2, range has gotten here for the archers, so it's a huge swing. You get that from their blacksmith. But the troopers' range was gotten in T2 from the troop centre, so not that important. If you want a priority order for obtaining them, go armour and then damage. After the War Centre, sometime between around 20 to 28 game time minutes, you'll feel comfortable enough to rally a couple of workers onto Nova with a Nova processor and work towards the 200 Nova. Once you have this, you can aim for a spaceport. The spaceport can help you get to 800 food, 200 Nova by being flexible with your surplus resources and give you a second building to T3. When you hit T3, you will want a mech factory or 2 and an air base. Each one of these is going to cost you 25 ore a pop, so you can either just buy some from the spaceport or you could put a few workers onto ore as well. And this should be enough of a general outline for how T2 is going to play out. Just to summarise, you've got your initial rush, you need to fix your economy, make sure you can produce everything properly, you've got to expand your economy, getting all those farms that'll help you work towards tech level 3. Now, we can get a bit more technical, now that you understand the sort of flow of tech level 2, and where the opportunities for damage are going to lie, and how they change with the introduction of turrets. Between your scout and your initial group of troopers, this should dictate the flow of the game for both players, who's being defensive and who's being offensive. The most effective way to really do damage early on with troopers is to have a separate control groups wandering in and out of your opponent's base, but you're only going to be able to pull this off if their base is very open. Typically, a lot of games have been played on desert because it's a fun open map with a fair amount of food early on and a nice array of hills for strategic fights, comparable to Arabia from Age of Empires 2, and probably another reason why it was favoured. The more open your opponent's base, the more angles you will have to run troops in and hide them. With this approach, you're much better off leading your opponent's troops away from their base rather than taking a trade with them, unless you absolutely can win the trade, of course. Reason being, they'll likely chase you with a lot more troops than you have to win the trade comfortably, just because they've got that defender's advantage. And just by luring them away, you're going to create more opportunities elsewhere for your other control groups to slide in, snipe a worker or 2. And this will mainly be centred around the farms because they're the most open and harassable sort of area, and you can slowly out-multitask your opponent here and get a quicker tech level 3 lead on them. Additionally, if they get to kill off your troops here without incurring much damage, they will immediately be able to swing the momentum and counterattack, meaning you'll have to respond in kind, and just by keeping the pressure on, you can buy yourself a lot of time at home to wall up the areas of your base and feel a lot more confident catching and killing any counterattacks the longer you can delay it. Now, this approach of small control groups picking your opponent apart is a lot more likely to net you damage simply because you're disregarding the defender's advantage of having more units on hand by just not trading with them. The other approach is just going to be brute force and a lot less taxing of a mechanical nature, and that's just slapping your next groups of troopers together and operating in a large control group. Looking for favourable trades, perhaps catching your opponent not looking at their army, or you have the elevation advantage. When you cull a lot of your opponent's troops and you're able to maintain a numbers advantage on their side of the map, you can just brute force walk into their farming area and start killing farms and get a lead towards T3 that way. Now that you understand the flow of T2, how to do damage to your opponent with your troops, this should all be taken into account by you with how you set up your base. Throughout T2, it's great practice to always be walling, ABW. You can layer prefabs in long lines on the outskirts of your base. This will give you advance warning through line of sight of units coming your way and delay their approach, meaning you can use that opportunity to defend the attack and possibly counterattack at the same time. These walls you build throughout T2 will pay off massively later on if both you and your opponent have gotten to T3, slowing down strike mechs, which are the ideal raiding unit there. Sometimes with your carbon, as it gets mined down, the part behind it can be stood in by troops and they can shoot your workers from the other side. Now, that's not good at all for you, because it might take a while to get your troops over there to deal with it. You'll lose some workers and you'll maybe have to pull them away and leave some of them idle. So you can play ahead of this by simply placing prefabs behind the areas of your carbon to stop troops stationing there. So often it's best to be proactive with your building placement defensively to prevent your opponent controlling where your troops are and leaving you a lot more wiggle room with what you want to do with your troops. Now lastly, I'm just going to talk about various bits and pieces pertaining to tech level 3. Firstly, what to focus on when you hit T3. Well, if you have a lot of troopers left over, you can get heavy trooper upgrade and the +2 range upgrade, using them as a sort of core force to go and snipe farms. They can kill the power core quite quickly and kill mech destroyers, strike mechs in quick volleys while there is low numbers of them. You might not always want to get the heavy trooper upgrade as it is a big Nova cost and often you might be spaceporting to afford it, but the more troops you have the better off, and if you're a civilization that gets repeater troopers later on, nice to have. The range upgrade you should probably just always get if you have decent troops left, just because it's a cheap food cost and the range is nice. You can draft in grenadiers or anti-air troopers later with your army and they'll benefit from it greatly. Now, your standard T3 production buildings would be 2 mech factories and 1 airbase. The strike mechs have a lot better ability to stay out in the map, kill enemy troopers and workers, and support later pushes. Often in team games, it's centered around double air bases instead, but in 1v1 the strike mechs can snowball with numbers and war center upgrades and outright snipe their counters, the mech destroyers. Fighters can't really do this against anti-air turrets. The fighters are just better served for harassing outskirt areas of the base, forcing anti-air troopers and anti-air turrets, and just making things wonky for your opponent. They may rely on anti-air troopers to defend the fighters. You're getting an opportunity to snipe these with your strikes and go in and get worker kills easy with the fighters, and vice versa with grenadiers. The air can pick them off if they overextend at no cost. Fighters also shut down anyone trying to just push strikes away with bombers in T3, meaning they'll have to make grenadiers, mech destroyers or their own strikes to deal with it. In more closed maps or with complete walls, double airbase might be more appropriate, particularly if you're a civ that can go T4 air later, but I'll maybe make a video centered around T3 and T3 fighting as its own thing. Since we're still thinking about T2 fighting and working towards T3, either through mistakes by yourself or simply you've just been outplayed, your opponent may beat you to T3. Now, you might be on your way yourself, or not even close and have to turtle up. You can utilise grenadiers to counter strike mechs and anti-air troopers to gun down fighters, but it's absolutely on you to get really good value trade with these because the time to kill for strikes and fighters on trooper units is so low. If you make mistakes, you could lose them all quite volatilely and just outright die. Best to hug your command centre and your turrets so that if you miss your shots or you get overwhelmed, you can garrison them to safety. Also, depending on how close to T3 you are and how many troopers you still have, I'll throw some basic ideas here, just so it's going to be really up to you in real time what you want to do with them. If you're out on the map close to your opponent, just go on the offensive and try to stall with them. 1 to 2 strike mechs are going to have to micro quite hard against the largest group of troopers, and you can maybe snipe the strikes or just delay a good while for you to get things in order at home. If your opponent still has a lot of troopers, You can try and trade with them quickly before they get them upgraded. If they get to trade with you and the upgrades are in place, they'll win way too comfortably and you'll just likely lose outright. If you're, however, fairly close to T3 yourself, you're probably best just keep your units alive and upgrade them yourself. It's going to be on your opponent to sort of use their T3 lead to bully you and pick you apart with the fast-moving strikes and the fighters to either outright kill you or get a big economic lead and then forward you later. Now, since you should understand all that, I'll just focus on what to do when you went for a rush and for whatever reason your opponent has snuck past you, that they are just going to fast T3. It's on you to realise this as soon as possible and use your existing troopers just to do some good damage. So, number one, knock them off Nova and Ore. Most likely, they will build 2 turrets or guarantee their carbon income and keep those workers safe. The Nova and the Ore should be easily harassable by a few troopers. 2, you want to kill farms, harass the farming workers. And 3, look for exploitable carbon. If you notice the scenario quick enough, you can throw 2 workers towards your opponent and build a turret behind their carbon. This can render the carbon completely dead for them, and you can use your existing troops to ensure you build the turret in the first place, wall out the workers, because the workers can bash down turrets very quickly, and then you can move your troops to the next obvious carbon spot for them to shut that down. Now, it's unlikely you just get an outright kill, but you should get really large leads in economic income and worker count to make transitioning into T3 yourself a lot more comfortable, and narrow down their window to do damage to you with the T3 lead and make it much more uncomfortable for them. And lastly, understanding that above with turrets and placing them offensively, if you find yourself with a superior trooper count or an opponent that's turtling a lot with their troops, you may have opportunities to build turrets offensively. This at the cost of staying T2 yourself longer, but creating semi-permanent map control for yourself on their side of the map and creating opportunities to win the game out of nothing. But pretty advanced and rare stuff that, and maybe we'll leave that for a more detailed video in the future. Now that's all I really want to say on the matter of T2 rushing here. There's plenty of commentary videos on the channel where you can take this theory and see it applied by the players, but the best way to properly understand it is going to be executing it yourself within games. I hope that this theoretical layout of how a T2 rushing game plays out, why the turrets change where you can do damage to your opponent and where you're vulnerable, and the race that you and your opponent will have to go to tech level 3 all makes a lot more sense to you, and you can go into your own games with a better framework to build that knowledge and experience and become an expert at T2 rushing. Thanks for tuning into the video. Wish you all a pleasant day. If you want to see more GBG content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a like on the video. If you want to get involved with our GBG community, you can find the invite link to our Discord down below inside the description. And if you're looking for an alternative way to support the channel and you'd like to buy myself a coffee, you'll find the PayPal link in the description also. Thanks and take care. Bye bye.